Good evening. It's getting late, but I'd like to just get these videos recorded and be a series that I just post all at once pretty much on YouTube. For those who would like to know a little bit more, a different perspective than what is provided in the fermentation of the present rebellion, because the perspective provided in the fermentation of the present rebellion is, I'm just going to say it is not based on the brothers who are being accused based on what they have said and done. It is false accusations that are baseless, or that are misconstrued with a tone of suspicion, and the words and the fellowship of these brothers being accused have not been included as primary sources. And those brothers that were accused in the fermentation of the present rebellion are Joseph Fung in Hong Kong, John So who was in Stuttgart, Germany. I don't know if he's still there or not, if he's in the Philippines or not. And then John Ingalls in Anaheim, and Bill Mallon in the Southeast. So those four brothers are accused of fermenting and fomenting a rebellion in the 80s in what is called the Lord's Recovery. So I'm going to read another point from a book written by Steve Isett called Glaring Omissions in the Fermentation of the Present Rebellion. The claim Bill Mallon convinced John Ingalls to dissent. On pages 43 to 44 of Fermentation, Witness Lee says the fermentation eventually developed into a conspiracy in the fall of 1987. Brothers from different parts of the country began working together in an undermining way to exert influence on other leading ones. All this was done privately. Around that time, John Ingalls visited Bill Mallon in Atlanta. Bill brought him out to the countryside and spent a few days with him and eventually convinced him of his dissenting views and thus gained him. This was written and published in the Fermentation of the Present Rebellion, that a brother convinced John Ingalls and gained him. Up until that time, according to my knowledge, John had not spoken anything negative or critical about me. However, when John Ingalls came back to Orange County from Atlanta, there was a definite change in his attitude. He began to play an active role in this conspiracy. John Ingalls shares about meaningful talks with Bill in the Atlanta mountains. I quote, "In the following month, September 1987, due to my health and also due to a burden to fellowship with Bill Mallon, a coworker with whom I had an intimate relationship for 24 years, I decided to go to Atlanta, Georgia for a 2-week period of rest and fellowship. Bill had recently passed through sore trials and sufferings, and I hoped that our fellowship could render comfort and encouragement to him. We drove up to the nearby mountains and had a number of days opening to one another. At that time, I was entirely supportive of Brother Witness Lee and his ministry and work related to the new way that was being promoted. I therefore did my utmost to persuade Bill to visit Taiwan and participate in the full-time training. I felt this might be the answer to his need. On 4 separate occasions during those days, I attempted to convince Bill to take this step, but he steadfastly refused, affirming that he was not free or clear to do that. During that time, Bill explained to me how he had suffered in various ways by events that had transpired in recent months in the churches and in the work in the Southeast. I came away from our talks with one deep impression. Philip Lee was becoming increasingly involved in spiritual things concerning the Lord's work, the churches, the elders, and the co-workers. I had already noticed this in Irving, Texas, the preceding month. This I felt was completely untenable, incompatible with his position and person, and intolerable. Philip Lee was employed by his father, Witness Lee, to be the business manager of his office and was reportedly instructed to deal only with business affairs. He was totally unqualified both in position and character to touch spiritual matters related to the work of the Lord and the churches. I became alarmed and began to fear for the Lord's testimony. With this burden, I determined upon my return to Anaheim to fellowship with Godfred Otute, who was then involved in coordinating with Philip Lee, in the Living Stream office. I wanted to frankly ask him about Philip's role, expressing my alarm and concern. It was Philip Lee's increased involvement in the work and the discovery of Philip Lee's moral misconduct at LSM that were initial factors of change for Brother John Ingalls. The increase in his involvement in the work and the moral misconduct that at the same time Brother John was becoming very clear about through multiple witnesses and victims. The claim that John Ingalls said Taipei training should be stopped. So I'm going to go on to another point in the glaring omissions. Brother Lee stated on page 51 of Fermentation that John Ingalls said the Taipei training should be shut down. Whether John said so or not, the training had brought much concern to others also, beginning with the problem of Philip Lee's being in charge of the trainers. This was not a trivial matter, as Philip was a person reportedly found drunk several times in Taiwan. As the story goes, the brothers sometimes had to try to get him sobered up when it was time for him to address the trainees or the trainers. In addition to this, his former secretary reported to others that she had to clean up pornographic literature and whiskey bottles for Philip in his office. This was the person in charge of the training when Brother Lee was not available, which was most of the time due to Brother Lee's sickness and time spent in the Chinese translation of the New Testament. John incidentally did not think he said the training should be shut down. That he and others had serious concerns, though, was very true as well as justifiable. John Ingalls said, in addition, we began to hear reports, see videotapes, and read printed messages published by the Fulltime Training in Taipei of some of the things that were being said and done. Now, this really alarmed us. Foremost among these was the fact that Philip Lee was the administrator of the training, supposedly only on the business side, but actually exercising supervision in much more than business affairs. He was in daily fellowship with 24 of the trainers and leading ones who called and reported to him all activities. Failure to do so resulted in an offense. The trainees were even told Philip was administering the training. His power and position were growing immeasurably. And I have seen notes taken in fellowship among some brothers about Brother Philip being gone till the early hours of the morning, being with a woman. And I was one that was molested by Philip during this time. He was not fit to be in charge of the full-time training. Statements made by some of the trainers in Taipei amazed us, and I'm sure they did many others. This is John Ingalls again. Some examples are as follows. There is no need to pray about what to do. Just follow the ministry. We don't need to think. We just do what we are told. Follow Witness Lee blindly. Even if he is wrong, he is right. If you leave the training, you'll miss the kingdom. Our burden is to pick up Brother Lee's teaching and the way to make us all Witness Lees, like a Witness Lee duplication center. And to be one with the ministry is to be one with Brother Lee and his office, Philip Lee. Since Christianity, and another quote, since Christianity is in ruins, the Lord raised up the recovery. Since the recovery is in ruins, the Lord raised up the FTTT. Okay, but the FTTT was being administered largely by Philip Lee, who was absolutely, I can say with no doubt, living in gross sins, not repentant. He for sure never apologized to my dad for lying to my dad or to me for molesting me. An account of Brother Lee's position was given by one of the leading trainers, Paul Hahn, of the FTTT to a group of brothers in Dallas, Texas in the summer of 1986 in the context of how to be one with the ministry. There are witnesses to confirm it, including Don Rutledge. It goes as follows. The Father is number 1, the Son is number 2, the Spirit is number 3, and Witness Lee is number 4. And then there are those who are with Witness Lee. A brother asked, and who is number 5? The trainer replied, it is not quite clear who number 5 is, but pointing out, you brothers do not have access to Brother Lee. I and another trainer do. We can walk into Brother Lee's apartment any time and have breakfast with him. The way to know what Brother Lee wants us to do is to be in contact with those who have access to him. They will tell you what he wants to do. The hosting brother asked, "Isn't this a hierarchy?" The trainer replied, "No." The brother asked, "How then does this differ from what we've been condemning?" The trainer answered, "If the elders in a local church would practice in this way to carry out their burden, it would be hierarchy. But if it is practiced to carry out the ministry's burden, it is not hierarchy." When Brother Lee heard through us the above speech of his trainer, he took steps to rebuke and correct him. That such nonsense would be spoken by one chosen by Brother Lee to lead his training after all we had passed through and heard from Brother Lee's ministry is quite difficult to understand. Many aspects of the training bothered us considerably. Elders who attended the training in Taipei were instructed explicitly to carry out the same training in their localities. Pressure was exerted upon churches and elders to follow, implement, and conform to everything that came out of Taiwan. Failure to do so created problems. The effect of so much emphasis on ways, methods, and practices, all externals, resulted in a wilted wilderness condition among many of the saints. Many faithful older saints were rebuked and given the impression that because of their age, they were through. All official assertions to the contrary, the full-timers became a special class of people, and the full-time training was exalted above the churches, which were considered to have grown decrepit and were at best better than nothing. And that's a quote from Andrew Yu in Voice of the Young Heart. At best better than nothing, the churches. The elders were publicly degraded and blamed for all the ills. And yet the churches with the elders, and especially many of the older saints who were somewhat despised, gave generously and sacrificially to support the training. Their money was gladly accepted. In fact, some of the churches were drained financially due to the heavy burden of supporting their full-timers and other projects that were being promoted. Videotapes of the FTTT convention on November 23rd, 1986, and the FTTT graduation ceremony on June 1st, 1987, surprised us with the mixture of worldly ways and gimmicks that were practiced and hitherto strongly condemned among us. I have no relish in mentioning these things. My object is to record and inform the readers of the matters that burdened and concerned us in the fall of 1987. So that was John Ingalls. And I was in Taiwan in the spring of 1987 for my spring break, which is when I was molested by Philip Lee. And then in the summer of 1987, and our graduation, it was tens of thousands. Well, no, there was a convention with tens of thousands of people in a huge stadium. And I and Benson Phillips Jr. gave our testimonies. We were the two Americans, and I believe at least two from Taiwan, two young people, I think, also gave their testimonies. And at the end of our young people's training in Taipei, I and a brother named Robert were given these trophies as being the number one trainees. How was I number one trainee? There's so many consecrated, precious young people, and I understand, if I'm not mistaken, I've been told that Robert, after that young people's training, he stopped meeting with the people who identify as the local church or the church, the Lord's Recovery, and now I'm speaking out, having been very, very, very mistreated. So that was the point about the claim that John Ingalls said the Taipei training should be stopped, and then also the claim that Bill Mallon convinced John Ingalls to dissent. So 2 points. Thank you.